welcome back. Have a good lunch. This is the funding panel, also known as the catch-all money panel. That's what I've been thinking about it as. If you haven't met me yet, my name is Sara Eileen. I'm going to be moderating. I'm joined by Janet, Jack, Nick, and Kevin. And just to get started, I'd love it if you could each give us a quick introduction. Who are you? What sort of work do you do? And what sort of work do you get paid for?
I'm Janet. I am a painter. I do portraits. The last big project I did was teleportraits, which is portraits over video chat and live sessions, which was a big Kickstarter project. And what I do for actual money is not very much. I sell books sometimes when I'm not selling paintings, and that's most of the time. So.
I'm Jack. I have a day job doing design in the magazine industry and designing magazines for iPads. And then I have a whole separate career of writing and design my own ebooks, which I also make money at. And I do a lot of other freelance work, all of which, I don't think there's anything I currently do that I don't make money in some way. Oh, except for 24 Magazine, which cost me a lot of money and really fancy donuts.
I didn't know that was legal tender. I'm Fox-Gieg. I'm an animator and a fellow at Eyebeam, Art and Technology Center. And I am a researcher, graphics programmer, and adjunct teacher.
I'm Kevin. I am a composer. By day I work for an arts nonprofit that does grant making. And that's how I make most of my money because they give me a salary. I also do things like this and other random artistic projects.
Thank you. That sounds like a lot of us.
Yeah.
So the way this panel is going to run is I'm going to divide us into roughly 3 sections and then take questions. And the 3 sections of 3 sort of big topics I want to talk about each of you with are income, especially diversification of income. A lot of you do a lot of different things. I would love to talk about budgets, whether that's big budgets or no budgets at all. And I would like to talk about the difference between ongoing income as opposed to upfront funding or large funding, especially in the grant making process. So for starters, Jack, would you like to, and obviously everyone else will take summary, but I've got some questions that I think I'm going to point to each of you individually. I know that you have a very diverse income source and that you've worked very hard to establish it. Can you talk a little bit about that and sort of what that has meant to you and how it's come to be?
Yeah, well, I enjoy my day job, but working in print media is not going to make you a great deal of money anymore. So my day job is my base sort of money coming in, and then through publishing ebooks, I've created a sort of passive income that right now is paying about half my rent. And I kind of want to get into a place where it's paying all of my rent, so then I'll have that income coming in, plus my day job. Then I do freelance design work. I do freelance copy editing a little bit here and there, trying to do some photography. So these are all things that sort of use the base, my knowledge base that I have from work and from studying and design. And then just networking and creating all these other little revenue streams that all together put me in a much better financial place so that I could do lots of different projects that I want to do. None of this money is for, like, you know, partying or anything. It's just for doing other projects.
I'm not sure if that's true.
It's not true. It mostly goes into bourbon.
This is in your bio.
What about the rest of you? Do you prefer to go into the kind of model where you have diverse income sources? Do you like the idea of having one job that pays you and you do art on the side? What's that like for you?
Well, prefer. I have no idea what I'm doing in 2013. None. I mean, yeah, that kind of stability would be nice to have as an option. It just never has been for me. So, you know, diversity, i.e. making it up as you go along. I've never done anything else.
I have I have the day job, and that has a lot of stability. The idea of having multiple diverse streams and doing a lot of different projects in a lot of different ways sounds great to me. Having the stability means a huge amount. It means that I can sort of will something like this into existence with 100 other people, and it's sort of, I can take that risk because I have that stability. So while doing something much more diverse is appealing, the downsides are also huge for me.
I am not one of these people that is like very high energy and can do a ton of different things. Like the idea of promoting as more than one thing, like I see, you know, marketing yourself as anything freelance, as just one kind of artist, that's a full-time job. It's unbelievable to me that I could ever work the way Jack does of doing like 5 different things. I don't know where I was going with that. But there are ways to get around it, but they mostly involve like having some other way out, which in my case is not paying rent.
Let's talk a little bit about specialization versus generalism, especially as it relates to diverse sources of income. Janet, it sounds like you're a little bit more of a specialist, the other folks at the table more generalists. I think a lot of what we've heard from this conference is a lot of people saying that they're very generalist and that that's sort of the direction they have to go in. Do you agree with that? Do you think there's still room for completely specialized work in the arts and making money from that?
Well, I think it depends on if you have a place within an organization, then you can hone a specific skill, right? You can be very good at one thing, and there will be people around you to work on other components of whatever. So I think these two problems, like the disappearance of full-time work, the cannibalization of work, and the need for us all to be generalists, they go hand in hand. And I've heard it said, I forget where I heard this, but I've heard it said that in the end it all comes down to social skills. That when we talk about generalists, you're adding marketing to whatever it is you do. We're really talking about social skills on our own social graph.
Yeah, and when we're introducing, we're trying to talk to people about those generalist marketing skills, the new advice is always to treat large groups of people as if they were small groups of people, and to talk to organizations as if they were your friends. And that also does come down to social skills. And it's this weird way that being able to get along with a lot of people is a kind of privilege that, or creates a kind of privilege that wasn't available before in a world where a misanthropic artist could be picked up by a gallery and there would be a career and there would be an institution for other people to take care of that, because it wasn't feasible for one person to do all that. So, given the technology, so it had to be done by an outside group. And now that that's not true, people are willing to do it. So the people who want to do the old thing have to live in a different world, even if they can still do what they do, though fewer of them can.
The way that I am a generalist is that I still try and be a go-between for those misanthropic artists that are still out there that are making amazing work. And the few opportunities that I get, which are often shaky opportunities, I kind of try and get them in there and be their representative. I'm still working on trying to like do that in a reliable way. But I would absolutely love to have a full-time job that supported everything that I did, but at the same time I find that I can't balance. So.
I think I'm a little bit older than most people here, but we're all sort of first or second internet generation. And like for me, I've been a blogger for like since there was blogging, since it existed. And from that, it's where I learned initially how to do some HTML. It's where I learned to do the first graphic design that I ever did. It's where from there I started doing photography because I wanted to learn how to take better pictures. And my generalism is more really trying to figure out how to do a lot of things online. And it took me a while because I work in a very professional, my day job is a very professional situation where we do use a lot of specialists. And it took me a long time to realize that I didn't have to be a specialist to do a lot of things. And somebody could give me some money to build a really rudimentary web page, whereas my internal designer is horrified by what I'm like giving them, like this is basically just like a template. Like people mostly are paying, I think a lot of us, to do things that if they searched online for a couple of minutes, they could very easily figure out how to do. And it took me a while to realize that that's still valuable. Like those people don't have the time or the tech savvy to do that, to even do that simple search that seems very similar to a lot of other people. And it's not taking advantage. It's a job. Something you could make money doing.
Well, let's talk about budget. I just want to hear about your personal experiences with being on a budget, whether that's being on a budget that's nothing or it's working on a project with a very high budget, and how that sort of affects the way that you work or the way that you go through life or the way that you do projects. And Jen, I know that you were wanting to potentially talk about that, so I'll pitch that to you first.
Well, I was thinking about it in terms of like how to work with a budget that is much lower than what you need, and it has to be integrated into your personal budget. You're like just constantly balancing everything, and so part of that is to overestimate what you're going to need. At the same point, it's also just cutting corners as much as possible, doing everything yourself that you possibly can. That's a really important thing that I found, and that's like, yeah, I just Google how to do this and this and this and this. And so you teach yourself, and that way you don't have to sort of send these out to other freelancers, which is unfortunate, but you don't actually have the money to pay them, so that's one thing.
One thing I've found from doing independent projects like this and from working at an arts nonprofit is that a lot of the skills transfer down in this interesting way, so that I have experience from work looking at $40,000, $50,000, $100,000 project budgets and handling, well, how do we plan the contingency? I did a big 3-concert festival for work where I was watching every dime coming in and going out, watching the budget change over months, and having done that makes dealing with a $5,000 event like this one a lot easier. And if you want to see actually how I handle budgets, the budget for this event is online, it's public, you can just go look at it, it's a Google Doc, it has every receipt marked. And you can, if you've been looking at it, you can see how it changes from having these block amounts for like, I know we're going to have $250 that we need to spend on like extension cable and SD cards, and how that number goes down and gets replaced by specific receipts for extension cable and SD cards and coffee and parking and different things like that. But yeah, like those skills of budgeting conservatively and making sure that no matter what happens, if you are fucked, you will still have a thing. That's the most important part.
But it's also difficult. I mean, you're gonna, I forget who came up with this analogy, but there was a period in the 18th century when society demanded both composers and performers in one person. At other times, you could earn a living as just a composer or just a performer. There was this period when a lot of the sort of heroic gods of classical music came into being, when they demanded both performers and composers, and it was really hard for most musicians who were only one, because those two skills only appear at a very high degree.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, if you want to talk about the ultimate multitasker who manages a work-life balance and working all the time and diverse sources of income, I mean, go talk about Beethoven. He was a piano virtuoso. He was a complete rock star. He was also a great composer and also like hawked his publishing rights to every little non-unified German city-state over the entire nation, and sold his rights to the same pieces over and over again, exclusive rights, the same thing, 20 times to different publishers in different principalities. He was an operator, like going back in Palestrina in the middle of the Renaissance, was such an incredible self-promoter. He was the guy who put out the thing about how Palestrina saved polyphony. Like, these are the names that we remember, and they have all these insane business skills. It's not like a new thing that artists have to be good at.
But I don't know, I would argue as to whether that's a business skill that we need to tell them to go oversell your rights to everything.
I saved Counterpoint.
But it just makes
We have
it hard.
scam artists, to be a complete scam artist.
It's an art.
This is this creeping thing of my paranoia that there's never really good artists, there's just good business people. And that really scares me. And there have been a lot of artists, especially in the past 50 years, that have made all of their art about that. that is what art is about now, is the artist is a business person.
We go through periods. Like we're in a period where one person has to have both of those skills, and it is more difficult for most people. You know, we're lucky if we have one exceptional talent, and if our nation demands more than that, it's much harder.
Well, the great thing is that these artist business people are sometimes nice enough to hire on artists who aren't good business people as assistants, and build an empire that way.
Yeah, go for
Like,
it.
if I can go, since I'm a person who's usually working for the people who are organizing things and creating budgets, something that I've been doing a lot of is trying to fit into people's budgets, especially when those budgets are small, by, this happened in my job and in other places, taking other things besides money, like more vacation days, more things that don't cost my employer a great deal of money, or you know, building a website in trade with something else, or doing something for some conference and, you know, accepting promotion or something else. You can fit into people's lower budgets too, if you understand what's valuable.
Well, that sort of ties into another thing that I was curious about talking to you all about before we get into some more practical strategies about funding and income, which is in this idea that it's necessary at this moment in time for us to be generalists and have all these different skills. How does your background affect your ability to be an artist? And I mean things like growing up in a household that has money or understands how to manage money, or carrying some kind of privilege, being in a certain class, going to a certain school. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you feel like the arts community is trying to address those issues?
I feel like it's a really big deal. One of the things that needs to be addressed is the ability for people to become artists, which takes a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of support, basically. You need the time to go get the training, you need the time to participate in the community, and you need the time to make the art. And so that means there needs to be a certain level of cultural encouragement, and there needs to be a certain level of money involved in your life for you to become that. Not absolutely, but these things make a huge difference. And like, if you have the ability to move to Brooklyn and not have a day job and make a bunch of art and go to a bunch of parties, you can build a career in a way that a lot of other people just don't have the opportunity to do. And I don't actually think the art world is doing a terribly good job of combating that, because money is scarce in the art world overall. And this is the same thing that's happening with unpaid internships, where people who have the ability to take an unpaid internship are people who have a certain background, a certain means, a certain ability to build the connections and the networking and the experience that other people don't have access to. And so arts organizations that are cash-strapped are also going to look for people who are creating the art that they need, or who can do the thing they need them to do and not be a drain on their budget, and not be somebody whose network you have to develop and whose skills you have to train. I mean, for-profit companies are barely paying for skills development for employees anymore. I don't know any arts organization, at least for composers, that is financing composers to get better at what they do. Like, publishers don't pay for you to go learn more counterpoint. It doesn't happen.
I think a wonderful sort of look at the pure value of that kind of privilege, apart from the money, is of all things the biography of Dr. Seuss, and I forget the author. This wonderful book, because he was the heir to a German beer fortune. His dad made the mistake of investing it all in America just before Prohibition. But he was sent to Ivy League schools. He was basically thrown into New York, you know, as a young man. No money, but all of these connections when he built his storied career, truly by the people you know. And that's certainly been, I mean, my experience. I'm from West Virginia originally, and then escaped to Carnegie Mellon at 18, and that's been invaluable. Dr. Seuss himself refers to this experience, privileged school experience, as a coincidence-making machine. And I always think of his elaborate Rube Goldberg devices. That's exactly what it is. It's not that you're introduced to you know, people who can instantly sort of hire you or offer you things. I mean, those are patrons, right? Not colleagues or peers. But the world you occupy from that point forward, you bump into people you know. It's fundamentally changed.
Yeah, this has been a major source of anxiety for me because I feel that, you know, most of my career now involves like tugging on the strings of people that I know just because of where I grew up and where I went to school and what my parents paid for, which is like, it feels icky because now I'm like out here asking people for money and like every party I go to is a networking opportunity. And so quite often I'll just pull back from that, and I'll pull back from being social because whenever I'm social I have this like fear that I'm going to end up like, give me your money. And it's just a really unfortunate to imagine people seeing you that way.
Yeah, I think that's a really shared experience. My work and my networking is taking over my entire social life for artists, and it's hard to pull back from that and have a social life that isn't about work. At least I found that. I mean, I used to go to trivia to have fun, and now we have a podcast. With that guy and that guy. And it's like, everything becomes about a project and making and doing and putting out and creating. And
would you say that that means that everything becomes about making money or it becomes about making art?
I'd love to make money from the podcast, but I don't expect to. It's partly that I love it is partly about making art, and it is partly about the creative impulse and just building and growing and doing, which is wonderful, but it's also kind of relentless.
It's this feed of money capital into social capital and then back again, where you really have to make good investments both ways.
Yeah.
And that's just like, it's your entire life.
We could have a whole other conference about attention economics and the value of social capital and how it connects to money, and how you can't really spend it in the same way that you spend money, because if you ask a friend for a favor, they're still going to be there. And often the experience of asking them for a favor will bring them closer to you and will make them more valuable and make you more valuable to them. And so like you can't establish a conversion rate between social capital and money capital because they don't function in the same way at all, but they both serve a purpose of enabling people to accomplish complex collaborative tasks in a really interesting way.
Which is what money is for in the first place, right? I mean, 30 years of right-wing economics aside, fundamentally the value of money will do for it. It was always a way of coordinating complex activity, no intrinsic value.
Jack, you have anything to add before we?
Well, just so in my self-publishing, somebody came up to me a couple of months ago and had a 20-something writer who wanted to publish his stuff, and she said, "Oh, you should talk to Jack. It's virtually free to do this. Like, all the tools are free. You go on Amazon, you put this free thing, and this guy's looking at me with these wide eyes, like, oh, this is great. I have a book. I want to put it out for free." I said, "Yes, it's free if you know how to use the Amazon system. If you have very expensive design programs to be able to make and design your own book, not to mention the time off from work or free time to write an entire book, and then the education and the knowledge to be able to put all these things together without hiring someone to do this, someone to do the design, someone to edit it, someone to do all these different parts." And so he was sad then.
So one other thing that I do sometimes for money is I curate for a nonprofit organization that was established about 20 years ago. And through that, I've run into a lot of older and younger artists and writers and poets who don't, they don't have the computers to do things with. They don't have anything to do what they need to do. And so I'll be like trying to, get them to work with me in the way that I feel things need to work, because I was raised on the internet. And I keep running into those limitations, and so I have to keep reminding myself, okay, no, they won't be able to do that. They don't understand it, but they still need to get out there somehow. And I actually ended up like republishing Steve Cannon's book through the whole Amazon system, and yeah, you really it's a whole process, and I don't think anybody else working for him could have learned how to do it.
Well, I want to switch gears a little bit, and I kind of want to talk about or toward the purpose of demystification, specifically of both crowdfunding and grants, because I think some of us may have experiences with crowdfunding. You all have some experience with crowdfunding because you're at a crowdfunded conference. But I know that I personally find the grant world rather opaque. So Kevin, you work in an organization that gives grants. Can you talk to us just about what it's like on that side, what goes into making a grant, how that world is sort of structured?
Sure. Well, to start with, I'm not on the grant giving side of the house. So if you apply to New Music USA, I will not read your application. I will not send it to the panel. Other people will do that. And they won't even make decisions because we have outside panels that make all the decisions. Our job is to be impartial and to prepare everything to be fairly reviewed. It's also good to note that New Music USA isn't a foundation, so we don't have a giant endowment that pays for everything that we feel like doing. So we have this conversation once a week where someone calls and says, I have this great idea to do with all this new music and all these composers, all I just need is for you to pay for my idea. And we say we have grant programs that you apply for with deadlines and guidelines and goals and funders that need us to fulfill those goals, and we can't just pay for the thing that you like. And they say, oh, this happens once a week. But
in fact, the boss that I was just talking about called him up at one point and was like, hey, do you have money for this one performance that we're doing? Like, no.
Well, but the thing is we do have a grant program that can cover that, but like there's a deadline and there's guidelines. And this actually gets into another aspect of class where being prepared to handle writing a grant application, being prepared to submit it and get the language in the order that you wanted to get it in, and think about the needs of the person who's going to be reading it, and have the sort of bizarre jargon of wanting to make the world better through giving a composer $250 to talk at a concert, and how to phrase that and write a successful application is its own skill that is incredibly tied to class. But the way this happens is that you go to our website and you fill out a form and you answer specific questions about your specific project. And it is project-based in exactly the same way that Kickstarter and crowdfunding sites tend to be project-based. They don't have to be, but often they are. Where you have to have a thing that you want to do, and it has to definitely be happening, and then we will chip in some money. There are things we will pay for, and there are things we won't. And you have to report on what the money is for, and you have to report on what it's spent on. We often don't require receipts, but there are grant funders that do. It's an odd process at this point in time, particularly because of the speed involved. So you have, for one of our main programs, Creative Connections, you apply in January. And that's for activity happening between April and June. And then you find out a little bit later, and then your thing happens, and then you write a report, and there's like 7 months in there. And often the grants are $250, $500. It's a lot easier to do that in another way. Grants are often the most time-restrictive and purpose-restrictive way to fund something. Because you have to do it on the funder's time scale, to the funder's goals, for those reasons and to advance those purposes. And you have to write to them about it, you have to tell them everything you're doing. And that's a huge burden to go with getting your money. And a lot of the awards are at least staying the same size and not keeping up with inflation, but many of the grant awards, a lot of organizations are shrinking. So it's a very, very tough thing to do. And we, as an organization, both apply for a ton of grants and give away a ton of grants. So we're in this odd position of being on both sides of that conversation. We have like a professional development department that I used to be, and we also answer these things, and we have outside panels that do all this stuff. So, I mean, there are a couple practical things I feel I should probably say at this point. The calling up and turning up at offices does not help at all. Like, people will tell you, establish a personal relationship. Don't do that. Call with questions about the guidelines. There are people who are there to answer your questions. Their job is to give away money well and fairly. They will talk to you. It's their job. But showing up and handing them your grant application will do nothing because their job is to be impartial. Their job is to ignore that. And usually they're not the ones making the decisions. Usually there's an outside panel who they have to present the information to, who then votes and makes a decision. If you want to print on lovely, lovely paper and put it in a lovely, lovely heavy binder, the first thing someone will do is take it out of that binder, throw the binder away, and collate them page by page after making Xeroxes to distribute to a panel. So like, there are a lot of things that you think you can do that will help, but that often won't. One of the most important things to understand, for me at least, about applying for grants is that every institutional funder is really an individual funder. One person is going to read that. And so write to them. If you can figure out who they are, that's great. Often with panels you can't, but you try. And you say true things and you say them in order. And it's a difficult writing task, but I often say it's a lot like making an omelet. There's a trick to it, and you can learn it, but at the end of the day, it's not really that hard. It does, however, help if you have some good eggs in a good pan. So like grant funding for things that are awesome is easier than grant funding for things that are not. That's the very short version of it right now.
Nick, you are on the other side of that with being someone who has fellowships and grants. Talk to us about how you deal with that.
Well, for starters, one thing I'd like to reinforce that Kevin said is that split between the administration and the jury in every grant-giving organization. The administration is there to run it, and the jury is there to pick who wins. And a good organization keeps those two at arm's length. So the good news is, for those of us applying for grants, you can apply to the same grant year after year, knowing that different people, often completely different people, right?
We work hard to make it be completely different people.
Are looking at it each time. So often I see people give up because they've been rejected a certain number of times from a given institution that is actually meaningless. Because whoever comes around to look at it next time, it will be a different group of people.
It's like gambler's fallacy.
And yeah, I mean, there are other things, where that's not the case. But it is the same. But a lot of these grants, it tends to be different. And then also, often, the applications will slightly change from year to year. But fundamentally, you can submit the same proposal, making sure there are no gotchas in the new application where they reordered some questions or something. And of course, you should solicit feedback from people, friends of people doing this. I certainly would not have gotten some of the grants that I've gotten without help from people who have been through the process already, told me how to improve a proposal. But fundamentally, you can keep submitting the same proposal until someone, catches someone's eye on a jury. I know that right now, what's funding my work at Eyebeam, so Eyebeam has a fellowship, and the Canada Council for the Arts has a research grant for the motion capture system. I'll be demoing here later. And the first of those I applied for, I think this is the 12th time that I applied for it, and Canada Council was the 5th. So if it doesn't have an entry fee, right, it doesn't have an entry fee, and if it is an organization where a new jury is looking at it each time, and since then I've served on a jury in Eyebeam, I can tell you it's an entirely different group of people, then just keep doing it. I have to file a folder on your computer full of proposals, mix and match. I've had sort of Hail Mary success sometimes sending a proposal for another grant unaltered to something with deadlines approaching. But I'm able to sort of scrape by in good years and bad years. Bad years when I'm mostly doing freelance work and not looking at my own stuff. But you have to be doing dozens of these per year, but not all of them need to be original. That's the key, is that you should be recycling proposals constantly.
Yeah.
Practical question.
Yeah.
Where do we research grants?
That's exactly what I was about to ask. Is it just go to Google and put in arts grants?
There are different organizations that list these things for different fields. None of the listings is authoritative. So for composers, you can go to the American Composers Forum. They maintain a great list. The American Music Center used to, but now the ACF does that. For other fields, there are different ones. There are arts councils often also have good lists. Also look at the resumes of people you admire. They will list the awards they've won, and then Google those and put them in your calendar. Another great trick is once you've sent in an application one year, as soon as you send in the application, put a note for the next year to look for the deadline and look it up and do that in the calendar, so that even if you get it, so if you get it, you'll see the note next year and go, oh great, I already got that. And if you didn't get it, you'll see the note and be like, oh great, I'll refresh that application.
Well, I think at this point my advice has to get kind of schizophrenic though, because on the one hand there's what we can do as individuals in the short term to try and succeed in this area, but in the long term, right, we've been facing 30 years of austerity in politics, so this is a pool that is shrinking. And yeah, if you take a look at my resume, a lot of the things I've gotten, so I'm 34, a lot of the grants I applied to say right out of undergrad don't exist anymore. Some of them do, but in terms of we're in a pool, dealing with a shrinking pool, and what's true, when some of these grants disappear, then the ones that are left become more competitive. So if you look at someone's resume who's older, and I see huge divides between people sort of in their 40s and older, people in their 30s, people in their 20s, people just coming out of school now. So some of the grants on someone's resume my age may no longer exist, and those that are may be harder to get than when I got them. And so in the long term, we can only remedy this by changing the political situation, right? By ending austerity policies. But in the short term, so right out of undergrad, I got Arts Council funding, the Pennsylvania Council for the Arts.
They fund us.
$15,000, but they no longer fund individuals, as far as I know.
Thank you, the 90s.
Yeah. Now, there is a way to increase, in fact, if I try to think over major grants that I've gotten, Fulbright is still around, and opened to anyone that, one random note that the odds of getting that vary greatly by country, and they publish the odds. So you can go to their website and download a PDF, and it's actually much better. I went to the Netherlands, for instance. Depending on which country you go to, which was, I believe, 4-1 at the time, and they change. But it's not like, I mean,
the UK is like 200 to 12, yeah. And France is like 30 to 5. Like, the difference, it's ridiculous.
Right. So that's still around. The Eyebeam Fellowship is still doing well. They have multiple grants of different sizes every year. People who are working in the technological angle. But a lot of them are going to individuals. The state arts councils have been decimated by the crisis. One thing you can do, right, if you go through an existing arts organization, it's called conduiting, right?
Fiscal sponsorship.
Fiscal sponsorship, yeah. They will take a cut, 5% often, 3%.
Fractured Atlas, which is one of the great fiscal sponsors in the universe, will take 6%, and they will also do a lot of other wonderful things for you.
So what does that mean exactly? What's financial sponsorship?
Fiscal sponsorship is when you are one person and you don't have your own nonprofit and you want to act like you have one so you can get big grants. Because there are a lot of foundations that, some of our grants actually in Music USA cannot go to individuals. Some of them have to pass through a nonprofit. And if you know someone who has a nonprofit, they can fiscally sponsor you by like letting your money sit in their account and then giving it to you. Often bigger arts organizations who do this have a fee associated with it. This even goes all the way up to multi-million-dollar science research grants that go through universities, which is how universities are accustomed to taking half of a grant to pay for the science department. And so we've had actual experiences where a $10,000 grant to a composer for a commission fee was being passed through a university, and the university tried to take half of it. And we had to say, no, we're paying an artist.
I'm curious about actually where the money is, which is private investors. I have a friend who's a filmmaker who did go through Indiegogo and used Fractured Atlas, but he also had tons and tons and tons of private investors who were all libertarians who were invested in the message of this movie. And so, like, you do have to kind of kiss ass or be on their side in that way. And I have absolutely no idea how he appealed to these people.
I think that's called tapping into a community. It's a nice way of saying it.
As opposed to sucking up to the aristocracy, which is the other way of saying it.
I'll add one piece from my personal experience before I want to move on and quickly touch on crowdfunding before we take a couple of questions, which is that my experience with getting grants, the one that I've ever gotten, actually came through the Career Center of my undergraduate institution. Not that the Career Center gave me the grant, but that if you've been involved in a large institution like a university, also sometimes like a business, there will often be someone whose job it is to find grants or to know where grants are. And so for me, I ended up walking into my Career Center once in my junior year and mentioning that I was trying to figure out how to do this project, and she was like, oh, there's a grant. Which she pointed me towards and I pursued. And that is a resource for you as well. Even if you're 10 years out of an institution.
Yeah, because they want
alumni
to
offices
too.
love you.
Yeah.
Even if you've never graduated from it, even if you just went in at some point. Like that's
Yeah.
why these people exist. That's what they're there for.
No, I combined those. Those were separate projects that my friend did. The private investors did the Kickstarter project, and the Indiegogo thing was another thing entirely. So.
All right. Well, we could go on about this forever. And since we are talking about funding, and it is the thing that everyone is dealing with right now in terms of funding, let's talk about crowdfunding. Let's just go down the line. What's your experience with it? What do you think about it? What are some strategies that people in the audience could potentially use that you know?
Crowdfunding is actually the only type of funding with which I've been really successful. And it's mostly been because I had a lot of people already that I'd been bouncing this idea off of for years and years, and it it all had to do with still individual appeals at an affordable level. And unless your project is something like that, it actually is kind of difficult to get people enthused about it. But it does seem to be like it has its own sort of attraction now. This mysticism as well, because I'm also working with a place that used Lucky Ant, which is a small business crowdfunder, to try and save their business. And they did it, but it really only covered part of what they needed. So I like crowdfunding. I know how to do it. I think it has a lot of limitations.
I've been part of, I think, 3 or 4 Kickstarter funded projects, which I haven't had that much of a hand in. My personal experience has been through, I've had a web page of one kind or another for a decade and a half. And in the last five years, I've had places where people could donate money to me to keep me writing. Because before I started publishing ebooks, I was putting out short stories for free. And still, a majority of the things I publish are under Creative Commons, and if you look around, you can get them for free on my website somewhere. So it's come to a point where people were donating money to me, and in a way, people were buying things that they'd already bought, already read, and the buying was just sort of a donation. So I think that happens a lot with Creative Commons works. The purchasing is just sort of like an extra thank you. But there's so many ways to get money from the internet.
It also drives some to the point of make it easy for people to give you money.
Yes.
Always have a way.
There's so many points, and it's one of the most frustrating things I see. When you see something cool on the internet, and you're like, take my money, but you don't know how to give them your money. That's the worst problem that anyone could face on the internet.
Well, I've heard it said that like when someone invents a perfect machine for converting attention into money, then that would be the death of old media. That like, this is what's happened, right? You need to have some kind of passive income from the work you've already created to create the next piece. I mean, Walt Disney, for all this old media shortcomings, has that wonderful line, some people make pictures to make money, and some people make money to make pictures to make more pictures. Yeah, whatever, you know what I'm saying. Make money to make more pictures. There we go. So that chain, right, the lack of that chain being established in new media is what makes it right now the lesser of these two.
Yeah, I'm seeing this advertising bubble of, for instance, apps being supported by ads for other apps supported by ads. I don't know where that ends.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe once in a while someone clicks on an ad.
But underlying that, those sort of Ponzi schemes, like say the YouTube content matching system, some people have written, could very easily, in theory, be converted into a system like the one I'm talking about. What if everyone had a surcharge on their broadband and mobile connection, which went into a rights collector society, which then dished out the money according to the number of views you had. I mean, this is what happens in radio. An agreement like this was reached for radio, and of course, there are a lot of interests who would fight this, so it wouldn't be easy to bring about.
Well, I hope this is Google's overall goal.
Yeah.
Read what the Future of Music Coalition is doing, because there's a lot of work to build centralized rights collection databases, and there are a lot of interesting drawbacks to that. But we're talking about crowdfunding?
Crowdfunding, Kickstarter.
This is the second Kickstarter project I've done this conference, and I have aged so much in the last month. It's amazing to have that experience of all these people deciding that, yeah, this is a good idea, and to have been talking to people about it for months and months and months, and seeing what they think, and refining the idea, and building it with everybody, and then saying, I think we got it, this is what we're going to do, and having everybody say, yeah, okay. It doesn't mean it doesn't kind of kill you a little bit. It's incredibly hard to do. Well, it's not, but the thing that you're doing is not actually that hard, because what you're doing is putting up a web page and listing some stuff and putting some things in the mail and writing a lot of email. But the stress of it is huge. I mean, I work at a grant funder, but I got good at Kickstarter and I teach people it, and I help people do it because I think it's a really important way to do this and to work from starting with getting other people excited about your art and then converting that group of people who've like cared about your music through school into people who will become a paying audience and help sustain your career. And I think it's a great mechanism for making that switch for people.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the myths about crowdfunding that we're dealing with right now, that people are sort of trying to understand, is the idea that people think of crowdfunding as taking money from the internet, like the internet is this amorphous being that just rains dollar bills upon us all. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
But my experience with Kickstarter and also the research I'm seeing is that the reality is that your crowdfunded money comes from your community.
Yeah, if you beat
predominantly comes from people you already know.
yeah, if you beat 15% money from strangers on Kickstarter, you're a huge success. The majority of your money will come from the people you know, and it will come from asking them for money. Kickstarter is a tool for making it easier to have those conversations. But you still have to have them. And it's very, very hard to do that. There are some words that are just hard physically to pronounce, like $10,000. It's just hard to say that sometimes. Major gifts officers at all kinds of institutions have these stories about going out to lunch with high-level donors. People they're asking for millions of dollars to build a new building. It's going to be great. And they have an amazing lunch, and they're so excited that they come back and they go, I forgot to ask for the money. It's hard to do. It's very, very stressful. It's a big risk. And sometimes they say no. And this is one of those things where, like, this image that we have of business people being people who are able to take no for an answer a lot and keep going. And that's kind of true. And it's the same way with the grant applications. You have to take no as a matter of course. If you're not getting turned down, you're not asking enough. But if you take that to its extreme, you will be annoying all of your friends. And you have to balance that. And you balance it by making really, really good work.
Well, also, like, the reason I haven't done any crowdfunding for my own work yet, my social grants aren't big enough. I have some amazing, I think we're starting to see some amazing examples of how this works. Like outside of, I think earlier I was talking about old media success, and you're Matt Palmer, you have tons of friends already through your old media career. But there's an animator in Toronto named Cross who does an annual Kickstarter, or Indiegogo actually, which is important because you get, no matter what the funding level is in Indiegogo, you get to keep it. So he does an Indiegogo campaign every year, and whatever he gets, that's his short film that year. That's his budget, and he makes a film for that budget. He already has a vibrant online career as a comics artist. He has the followers to make that work. I would imagine that the work that Kevin's doing, as this goes on, this will coalesce into some best practices where, okay, you have this many followers, you're ready. You know, this is how much you ask for. I can see it right soon being sort of common knowledge.
Yeah, it is coalescing out of different communities because everyone's trying to teach themselves how this works and trying to write about it and learn about it and study it. But again, it also comes with how wealthy your graph is. Like, if you're an impoverished artist and your friends are impoverished artists and you throw up the greatest Kickstarter campaign in history, they still don't have any money to give you.
Unless there are 100,000 of them, though.
No, even then, they still just do this. Yeah, I mean, and they feel bad, and everyone feels bad. It's like everyone's poor, and they all feel bad. Kind of want to prevent that. But I did an Indiegogo almost like right after I did my Kickstarter, and I did it with 26 other people involved in the project, and we made like 1/5 of what we needed to. I don't know whether it was just because it was too soon, whether everyone assumed that everyone else would promote it, whether I just kind of picked the wrong, well, no, they were wonderful artists and writers, so it wasn't the wrong group of people, but there was something that wasn't really gaining momentum about that one.
Too soon is definitely a thing that can happen.
Yeah.
This is something that fundraising arts organizations obsess about. It's like, did we bother this person this year already? Oh my God. Because a lot of people are used to the idea that they will give to things once a year. It's like the once a year thing for the film is a smart thing because people are okay with that. Like they pay their subscription fee to PBS once a year, though fewer people do that than used to. You will give an annual end of year tax deductibility donation, whatever. It's a generally good rule of thumb that people will buy something from you that much.
So, sorry Nick, I'm going to interrupt you, I apologize. We did start a little late and we are going to run a little late, but if you have to leave, no worries. We've got a couple minutes left and I'd actually like to take a couple of questions, if that's all right. It's a huge topic and obviously we could probably talk about it forever. How about in the back first?
Hi. For crowdfunding, particularly, how important is the tote bag? How important is the physical object?
Swag.
Swag. I know this is something that came up, but like the difference between, say, the Penny Arcade crowdfunding, which is like, give us money to keep doing Penny Arcade, or the Order the Stick one, which was crowdfund us and we'll give you all these stickers and all these books and all this sort of stuff. And I like, what's the balance there? How important is the
Kevin, how are you?
Okay, so the question was about how important is the tote bag, how important is the swag? This was an interesting lesson on this conference, because we built a swagless Kickstarter because I don't want to spend half my budget in 3 weekends mailing t-shirts to you people. You're lovely, but sorry. And then, I'm going to have to say his name on camera, he's French. Thomas de Neuville from I Care If You Listen donated tote bags to the Kickstarter, and we put those up on as a $15 reward, and people bought them like crazy. And sometimes people really want a thing. They want to have something to show as a mark of what they've done. And this is one of those things where it touches back to a lot of the wisdom that regular old marketers have been building for decades, that when you start doing crowdfunding and this sort of thing and building your own small business, you can learn from all of the stuff that the MBAs and economics PhDs have been slogging away at for decades. You could just steal their brains. It's cheaper than reinventing the wheel and faster. And to understand whether people want something, you sort of have to imagine who they are and sympathize with them and envision your community and your audience in your head, which is really, really hard. Because it's imagining what other people want. And at the end of the day, you're guessing, but you have to sort of try. So yeah, sometimes the swag is really important and sometimes the swag isn't really important. It depends on your audience.
But then also sometimes your project is a physical thing, like you were doing paintings. Yeah, so what was your
Yeah, but I'm
experience with that?
surprised. What happened there was that to actually buy the physical thing was 5 times what just having the physical thing made cost, which was kind of not a good idea on my part, because I had all these things and then I had to try and resell them, right? So I had to go into all this extra effort to sell a portrait of somebody to them when they had, just paid me for the experience of me painting it and then me sending them an image of it. So that was actually surprising that they didn't want the object. They just wanted the experience, or they could only afford the experience. But at the same time, I still had to produce stuff for that, and I ended up promising too much stuff. But that is the thing that I always respond to anyone who sort of brings up the magic word of Kickstarter. I always say, well, what can you do for them? What is the product that you're making that you can distribute? I mean, yes, we all see that you need money. We all need money, but you have to think of it in terms of what can people buy.
Yeah, marketing people call that the value proposition.
Yeah.
Lots of questions.
So I don't know where my question is in this, but it seems like we're talking a lot about systems that are outside of our control. Even with Kickstarter, you don't have control over what people are going to give you or what they're going to do. And it seems like we're not focusing a lot on what happens on the other end when you're actually managing money. And one of the big differences between business people and even artists as business people is the understanding and knowledge of how to use capital and how to use credit and how to sort of leverage yourself against risk. Whether it's having a home and being able to take risks because you own this home, or understanding how to use credit to your advantage and sort of building up your credit, understanding how to have an emergency fund and how to sort of utilize that. And it's a conversation that's not happening in the arts world, and I'm wondering how we can start taking some of the onus off of sort of being supplicants and actually bring it on ourselves as far as the financial management that comes on the other side. We need both. You have as an artist, we need an audience, but at the same time, there's this money. Everybody feels like money's so dirty. It's like something like, oh, I'm not financial. If I were financially inclined, I wouldn't be an artist. I'd be a business person. But that, managing your own money becomes part of the art. And I don't know. I
apologies for the jump in before my panelists. The idea that money is dirty is very pervasive and very unfortunate, because we don't need money to live. That is actually where we're at. A couple of resources before I pass it over to Nick, who's just jumped in, is there's functionally very little difference managing your life as an artist versus managing your life as a person with a small salary in any other field. And there are a lot of resources available to learn how to manage money. I read The Billfold, which I think is an excellent blog. There are several other blogs that are all about managing money. There are also people whose jobs it is to teach you how to manage money either as a small business or as an individual, including...
So actually,
yeah.
Art Home, I was getting that
Yeah.
pitch towards, there's an organization called Art Home that basically teaches financial literacy and homeownership and asset building for artists.
Very cool.
And it's, and just to add it to that list.
Yeah, please.
It's just,
Art Home, for those who didn't hear.
yeah, I mean, they don't give workshops directly, but they work with artist service organizations who also offer classes for free and all these other services that I think some artists don't ever get connected to. And there's just this whole world of free awesome stuff.
I'm also a big fan of small business bureaus, to be honest. Like, the bureaus that just exist in our boroughs, exist in Manhattan, are great resources, and they're out there. Anybody want to jump in on me?
Well, I guess, yeah, two things come in mind to me. Again, like I was saying before about schizophrenia, they're like the sort of small, personal, short-term questions and the big, long-term ones, societal questions. So in the short term, yeah, I probably wouldn't be here, probably wouldn't be able to keep doing what I'm doing if, when I was living in Toronto, I lived there for 5 years, and they didn't have a credit crunch in 2008. So I was able to get a $10,000 business loan that same year that has made it possible, or not loan, line of credit, I mean, which has made it possible for me to do what I do. It's that leeway, because all this stuff is so unpredictable from year to year. Say about the home ownership, that would be disastrous for me if I during a good year, because I never know what my income is going to be the next year.
Right. The main difference between being a salaried person and being an independent artist and making your money that way is that artists get a whole bunch of money all at once and then nothing, and you don't know how long it's going to last. So you really have to learn how to spend slowly, even when you're like earning quickly.
Yeah, and credit is so precious. Yeah, but on the macro view, I mean, art is like pure science, right? Theodore Sturgeon's law, 99% of art is shit. He was a writer. Most art is crap. Most pure science is subjective to your subjective taste, of course. Most pure science, fails to do anything useful. Societies that invest in one, if you look around the world, tend to invest in the other. They're long-term bets on the greater public good. So, in the short term, right, there are these tools that we can take advantage of to keep ourselves going. But in the long term, if there isn't a commitment, I mean, both of those areas, I don't know much about funding the science, as we've mentioned. We need a public commitment to those things, or they simply don't exist.
This is probably an opinion about investment strategies for artists that comes from somebody who has a day job. But for me, the rising value of social capital and of communities and of audiences and of attention, and the new methods for doing that conversion from attention and fandom into money, to me mean that the best long-term asset class that's available to artists is people. And building up that level of enthusiasm over a long time and continuing to make work and continuing to give it to people means that they will be more likely to give you money at any time you call on them to do so. And again, this is not a method for building a nest egg. This is not a method for building enough money to live off the investment income as a baseline and then do more with a project. But for me, it seems like if I get, for my music, a bunch of people who care about it now, in 30 years, they're all going to be making a lot more money. And they'll be willing to buy tickets and scores and CDs and different things. Though in 30 years, if they buy CDs, it'll be hysterical. But I think the point is still valid, that it's not, I don't want to go quite on the 1,000 True Fans bandwagon, because the 1,000 True Fans don't get you that much, honestly, unless they have a ton of money and will write you large checks all the time. But the idea that the thing that will grow more quickly than a stock portfolio, though actually, given the way the markets are going, stock portfolios might not be as crazy as they were a while ago, but the thing that's going to grow most quickly and has the most potential to become more valuable is the enthusiasm of people who care about your art. And it's this thing that's actually not available to people who make and sell things without passion and without energy. So like, the love for what you do is so much more valuable.
I think that
I'm so sorry. I'm actually going to call it because we're almost 10 minutes over time, and I want everybody to get a break before the next session. But the conversation is massive, and I'm sorry for people who have questions. Yes?
We have 5 more minutes.
Oh, I thought we were going until 3 o'clock.
3:15.
Oh, I'm sorry. More questions. I apologize. I misread my schedule. It's okay.
Can I just add on something?
Yeah, please.
Because I think
Totally wrong.
maybe all of us, like almost all the people who've spoken, with a few small exceptions, are in a very different place than pure artists or people who only do specific kinds of art for a living. And so we look at everything so differently. I was in a room full of people who write fiction professionally. And the two things that totally blew my mind in 2 different ways was, one, when I found out how much money they were actually making, it was way lower than I thought it was. And 2, when I told them like what I was making for my self-publishing, they were all somewhat impressed. And then I also mentioned that I also have a full-time job, which pays me 5 times that amount. So if I were just a writer, my life and my budget and my values would be so completely different than what they are now, and it frees me up to write in a very different way. I think it frees everyone here to create art in very different ways, because we're living in a post middleman society in that you can just create and immediately give it to the people. And so the budget and the value structure are completely different.
I think I cut you off earlier. I'm sorry about that.
Hey, I've been trying to ask Kevin this question, which I'm surprised hasn't come up already, which is how many followers do you think, just because I think you're the one who's most directly involved with this, means somebody is ready to ask them for money?
I mean, I have to evade that question, because I have to say that it depends on how much money you want and who the people are.
Followers in what? Twitter followers?
Also that.
Well, you know, and what platform, and does the platform matter?
Well, okay. The thing to think about is not the platform that people follow you on, or because the platform can involve a cafe, it can involve Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook,
People jogging after you as you
venues,
run across the country.
your family, like these are the thinking about people through the platform will give you a bad notion of the people. Thinking about the people by name is a really, really good thing to do. So this is the hardest thing I tell people to do when they ask me for advice about how to run a Kickstarter campaign, is write the names of all the people who are going to give you the money. Just name them, you know them, go through your entire address book and say, okay, is my mom good for $1,000 or is she good for $10? Answer that question. That's the hard thing you have to ask yourself to see if you can think this is going to be a good idea. And if you honestly, realistically think that everyone you know or that the people you know are going to give you X dollars for each of them, and that adds up to enough to be your budget, then you can go. But what you don't want to do is say, okay, I know that my friends are going to kick in like $20 a piece, and there's like 10 of them. And then there are these other people, but I really need this much money, so I'm just going to do it and see what happens. That's a great way to get old real fast and to fail on Kickstarter pretty dramatically. One interesting thing that I worked on recently was a campaign done by somebody who was appearing on Chopped. And we sat around going, okay, how much money is a cable TV appearance worth? Like, will the people who see you on Chopped not win? Google you and find your Kickstarter campaign and give you $20. I have no idea. The people who see a episode of Chopped in the first couple weeks when it runs, and it runs like 7 or 8 times because it's on cable, is like 50, 60,000. Oh wow, 50, 60,000, that's a huge number of people. So if you divide that by the 3% direct mail return, those people who are going to remember your name and Google you and do this stuff, well, the best models we could build got you anywhere from $10,000 to nothing. As it turned out, it was nothing. But the Kickstarter campaign was a good risk to take in that case. Which is another thing about crowdfunding, that it's a great way of doing market research at the same time as your fundraising. So you get to find out if your product is crap at the same time. Like, Kickstarter was designed in this way that let you test ideas. And no one uses it to test ideas. Everyone uses it to go, I have this thing and this is what I want to do. This is how I want to do it and this is the money I want. and failing on Kickstarter is this huge, huge problem. But it was built in this way so that you can say, I kind of want to make some pie. You guys like pie? No? Never mind. See you later. And no one has that attitude about it. It's really odd to see.
No one dislikes pie.
We'll take one more question.
I've heard this magical story from a couple people over my life of cold calling rich people who seem cool, telling them about your project, your organization, and getting lots of money for that. Is that a myth, or have you guys ever heard about that?
You will only hear that story from people who won the lottery at it. No one who failed will tell that story.
So here's a funny thing. I can't tell that story with the arts at all. So your mileage may vary on how well this applies. However, I used to work at a business that was primarily based upon cold calling. But it wasn't exactly cold. It was calling into networks that sort of existed and with pitches that sort of existed. The reason that cold calling is a thing, even though we were all sort of like, cold calling, that telemarketer who interrupted my dinner, is that cold calling works. Like, there's a reason that there are businesses built around it. So like, just randomly calling up random people and saying, hi, will you give me money? Probably not going to work. But calling up people with a really good pitch and saying, hey, I researched you and I found out about you and I thought maybe you'd be involved in this. To me, that sounds a lot like pitching people in your industry for informational interviews, which is a great thing to do. Because you can email someone out of the blue and say, hey, could you take an informational interview? And most people will say no, but some people will say yes. And if you can get used to the idea that people will say no, maybe eventually someone will say yes.
This is the other great piece of advice. When you want advice, ask for money. When you want money, ask for advice.
True story. All right, fine.
I know this, I'm not supposed to ask a question, but I want to reply to this one. Because we're now talking about how much money can we get out of Kickstarter, and does money generate cold calling, if that generates money. But I know many stories, especially this cold calling, about someone who wrote every single rich people he personally could think of. He got $0. But 1 or 2 years later, he could show that he did such an effort that it would build his case. Like 2 years later, said, "Look, I'm so invested. Can you give me the money?" And actually, that he gone through all of that, increased his chances, and then he get like $100,000 for his effort. This is a true story, and also Kickstarter. Maybe you don't get the money, but it generates like marketing. Publicity,
Well, this is what my nonprofit founder does. Like, that's where most of his money comes from. And so he's been calling the same rich people for 20 years, and they've gotten sick of it. Like, yeah, I mean, it worked a couple times though, so he just kept going.
Kickstarter, I think, is almost more valuable for PR than it is for money.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty much, it wraps so many things together. Now these days, a lot of people have Kickstarter. Kickstarter is their webpage for their product. That's what they tell everyone to go to. So it used to be you'd have a thing and then you'd have a Kickstarter to fund it. Now the Kickstarter is the thing.
Yeah, this is why I suggest that people just give up on the other crowdfunding platforms and use Kickstarter. Not because it's better, though it is, but because it's more popular and the brand has a lot of value. And you can just take the power of the brand and put it on your project. And that's worth money. It's true that it's fundraising through marketing, but it's also marketing through fundraising. So it's a lot easier to send people word about your project if you are raising money for it than it would have been to say, here's just my thing, I want you to care about it. It's also really true that the people you raise on Kickstarter are more valuable than the money you raise on Kickstarter. So the money is going to be what makes it possible to run any individual project, but the people are signing up to care about what you do next time. Provided that you make them happy and that you keep communicating with them and that you give them something valuable for their contribution. And so this is the same thing I was saying before. The most valuable asset class you have access to as an artist is enthusiasm for your art. The people are so much more valuable in the long run than the cash.
All right, now I'm going to call it for real. Thank you very much. I think we have a 12-minute break.